Thanks, Cynthia. Our topic today, the Changing Face of Feminism. We're talking about an incredible play, Rapture, Blister, Burn. I just want to introduce our panelists here. To my immediate left is Donna Gonzalez Weinholtz. She's a local activist for equality and co-host of the Debacus Factor. So Donna, thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Adrianne Moore is the director of this wonderful production, Rapture, Blister, Burn, and also professor of theater arts at Utah State University. So Adrianne, thanks for being here. Next to Adrianne is Sahara Hayes. She is a recent graduate of Westminster. She's just recently got a bachelor's degree in sociology with an emphasis in gender and sexuality. So Sahara, thanks for being here. And on the far left of the panel is Kristjane Nordmeyer. She's the professor of sociology and the chair of the gender studies department at Westminster College. So Kristjane, thanks for being here. So real quick show of hands, how many people have seen the play? So most everybody, okay. And are people at this discussion are going to go see the play again tonight, or has anybody here not seen the play yet? Okay, a couple. So, spoiler alert, still happened, but most everyone's seen the play, and there's just so much to talk about. Adrianne, I just want to commend you for an amazing production. Such talented actors on stage here, and what a wonderful play. So much to think about today, so it'll be fascinating. I just want to start off by talking about our main character, Catherine, and kind of what she embodies. And I'll just I'll throw a question out there, panelists. If you want to jump in, I might designate one or two of you to answer a question. But I'm looking for responses from all of you if you're willing to give responses. Audience, don't be shy. We have 2 microphones down here, and this is a lot easier for me because then if I don't see someone up in the corner of the theater that's waving their hand. If you can come down to these, then I'll make sure everyone gets there safe. If you don't feel comfortable coming down to the microphone, that's okay, just wave your hand, or if you have some issues getting down here, that's fine too. We'll try to get your question. So let's start with Catherine. We have the play opens with an awkward scene between Catherine, Gwen, and Dawn, and they are, there's a lot of history there that we learn, kind of some awkward history that we begin to learn as that scene progresses, but Catherine is sort of at a crisis in her life. She's a brilliant woman who's written all kinds of great criticism on what's happening in the world of feminism, but she finds herself in this sort of personal crisis that she finds herself really in a sense of unhappiness. I want to start with talking about what her character is all about and what she might represent. Adrianne, let's start with you because you're a director, and then we'll jump right into this. When you were reading the script and working with the actors, Catherine is sort of the figure that brings some of the feminist thought to the forefront. What was it about her that struck you?
Well, she's a real seeker, she's a questioner, and I really fought against and encouraged the actors to fight against the idea of having a representative from a whole lot of different views. We have people who do different things and who have taken different paths in life and have different experiences, but that's not to say that any of them have a clear sense of this is the right way to go. So, we meet somebody who is extraordinarily successful, and the most interesting times in people's lives, I suspect, is when, at least on stage, and often in real life, as our stage manager would call it, is when people are at a crisis point and when they are asking fundamental questions about how did I get here and should I have done things differently? So on one level, yes, she's certainly a representative. She's representative of a group of women who've had extraordinarily successful careers. And I don't think she's questioning whether she's got everything out of her life that she could have got, and perhaps whether she should have got married, could have got married, should have had children, where her life has led her. But I don't think for me there was any sense that the playwright is saying, oh, she made a wrong choice. The playwright's given us a fascinating character, and we are perhaps looking at aspects of our own journeys through her eyes. As she's in a crisis point in her life, which I think has to do with a whole lot of things, not the least her mother's recent ill health, and of course meeting up with people that she knew a long time ago. Early on, the other character, Gwen, has a great line about, just looking back and the life not lived and the grass is always greener. So in that respect, I think she's very familiar to us all, looking back and going, oh, I could have had a slightly different life, should I have gone that way?
I think some of us have been around long enough to see the whole cycle, and that is, as a young woman, there's pressure for you to have an education. There's maybe pressure for you to be a wife and a mother at a certain time. I came of age in the 1970s, and I only wish that I had been born in the 60s so that I could really be bad. And my parents, I was old enough to go to Woodstock, right? But never mind all that. But I think we see some of it now. I mean, now it's, the way I see it now, I think it's a privilege to get to stay home and raise your child, because so many of us had to go to work, whether you wanted to or not, because it was an economic issue. So women came into the workplace. But, the other thing I love about the first part of the play is the reference to Phyllis Schlafly, because this is a woman whose entire life is based on telling all of us that her opinion is absolutely how we must live our lives. But this is a woman who, I bet you she has a credit card, she votes, she received her education, and all of that was due to the fact that she's standing on the shoulders of women who were brave enough to go out there and say, change is necessary. And I swear I'm going to shut up in a second. But I am on the radio show with Jim DeBackus. I have to compete with him, so I've learned to really talk. Yes. But one of the first signs of dissent is having someone say to you that change is necessary. There it is.
Quick little background on Phyllis Schlafly, because she and Betty Friedan play they're kind of silent characters in this play, but their views and their ideas are challenged and embodied by different characters at different times. So Phyllis Schlafly is, I believe, 90 years old now. She's still alive. She is an American constitutional lawyer, conservative activist. She's also the founder of the Eagle Forum, which is an organization we are familiar with in Utah.
Good friends.
She opposed modern feminism, and she was against the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. So she continues to be a force in conservative politics, even at this age. So just wanted to throw that out there so we're all on the same page with Schlafly. But Kristjane and Sahara, I want to kind of get you in the discussion here. We have at the beginning of the play, and this changes throughout the play, and we learn more about Gwen, and we learn more about Catherine, but we've got one character who decided that she wanted to have a career instead of a family, and we have another character who decided that she wanted to have a family instead of a career. Can we talk about the challenges of women trying to have both, and what that constitutes, and is there happiness in trying to do both of those things as possible?
So I was just trying to think of a response to the question you had asked earlier, and now I have to think of the
Sure, well, we can go back to that one.
No, okay. So as you're asking about the specific characters in the play, I always put something in trying to think about it from a larger sociological perspective, because that's where my background is. So I try to think of what I can contribute there. I think it's looking at women in academia. It is much harder to balance a family. We don't have those same questions with men in academia, in the same way. So there's a much smaller percentage of women in those top positions that do have families, and that's not the case for men in those top positions. So I think the way that the academic time clock and tenure, and certainly outside of academia, other professional positions are set up. The organizations themselves are gendered, and I think that makes it difficult for women in this generation or previous generations to participate in those institutions. So while we can look at individual lives, I always think of what changes do we need to make within the organizations themselves, and recognize that those organizations are gendered. So that's kind of what I was thinking as you talk.
Sure.
Right, and I think, the way that it looks like the academic system is set up, it's not supportive of both. I don't see daycares on campuses frequently or things like that. So I think it is very much geared around the idea of either a male professor or a single woman. I think that that's the way academia is structured, and I think it's a hard job. I'm looking at grad schools right now, it makes me want to weep, but I don't know. I think in a hypothetical, idealistic sense, yes, it is totally possible, but I think that the reality of the structural system is that it is not.
Well, certainly if we look at our maternity leave laws in this country and the amount of time that we give women to be at home with a newborn, or a father for that matter, a newborn, I mean, women have to qualify for FMLA, which is basically taking disability to have a child and be at home. And we look at Canada, where I believe that women are allowed 6 months off and their wages are subsidized by the government. In France, it's almost a year. And we have political forces in this country who would call that socialism. But there are many studies to show that kind of home, of parents of both mothers and fathers being home and having the financial and economic freedom to do so build stronger families, right? So just wanted to throw that out there. I think that's really a barrier in our society.
Well, there was also a time where if you were pregnant and your employer found out, your job was terminated. So have we gone ahead? Maybe so. The daycares are off-site. But the irony of it all is I was reading about the EEOC laws when they changed in the 70s. And one of the reasons why Sears, who was one of the defendants in that case, got in such big trouble was one of the issues, and it strikes me because you're talking about pregnancy, is that the father was allowed to have a paid day off, but the person who was actually having the child did not have any paid time. Go figure. So, just saying.
I just had a thought on balancing these things, and there's lots of different examples within this play, but also just to sort of personalize it too. One of the things that the character of Catherine says, which I love, is she says, now we have all this newfound equality, but how do we practically manage it? So I know of so many people who have a partner, a spouse, and they have a joint commitment to the importance of child rearing and both of their careers, but physically making that happen, I think, is often incredibly difficult. I had a lot of conversations with my mother when I was directing, a lot of conversations with lots of people, and certainly read a lot when I was directing this play. And she said one of her few regrets is that she didn't work when my brother and I were small kids. She said, and the phrases she used were exactly the same as Alice. She said it just wasn't done. She took 12 years out. Now, she doesn't think that there's any reason why somebody else shouldn't have taken as much time as they wanted, but she took 12 years, and she said when she came back to work, she was so insecure about it. And it was really hard to get her career jump-started. But she used the expressions, it just wasn't done. All of my friends were at home with their small children, and it just wasn't done to be at work in the early 60s with small kids. And she also said it was frowned upon. And I just thought, there's just a whole range of factors in there, and a lot of them were obviously societal attitudes towards women with small children working, but also the kind of practicalities of whether both parents indeed had to work, legislature, but even with people who have this total commitment, just the kind of practicality. I know that I wouldn't say it was a sacrifice, but it was a compromise, is that I don't know how much you know about the business of being a freelance director, but unless you're attached to just one company, you move constantly. You can't have one person in a family who moves constantly and one who has a steady job in one place and raise children. So there's a lot of practical things about what the workplace does and doesn't allow you to actually do. And I think Catherine addresses that really beautifully. It's not just about the will, it's about different institutions, it's about childcare, and it's just, things that in the play are really laughable. Like, one of you wants to be an oceanographer, and the other one wants to go and live in Kansas. So, and I just think there's a huge number of practical as well as ethical and political considerations in this whole issue of balancing, for men and women, balancing career and family.
And I think men and women, in that marital partnership plays a huge role in this play as we move toward the character of Gwen, who is suffering from a lot of sadness and disappointment that partnership isn't working out for her. And there's a lot of resentment over the fact that she feels her husband, Don, for various reasons, isn't keeping up this end of the bargain. And that's what fuels a lot of her unhappiness and anxiety about it. Even though she seems, at the beginning, one of my favorite scenes, my favorite scenes in the play really are when the four women are having their seminar, right? And then through the dialogue and through all the different kinds of texts that are referenced in that dialogue, and from how we learn more about these people's lives through those discussions. That really, they're really wonderful moments in the play. But we learned a lot about Gwen early on in that first seminar period, because she is so frustrated by her marital partnership really falling apart, really not being what she had expected it to be, and really upset that she knows that it will never change. And I think that's another big theme in the play, the challenge of trying to make a partnership work, not just a romantic partnership, but a practical partnership of raising children and bringing in money and how that all works. And for Gwen, it's been a huge disappointment. I mean, that is, I think back, when we talk about Alice, or we talk about your mother, that there wasn't a sense that marriage was a traditional partnership. And I think in my generation, marriage is an equal partnership in lots of ways. Any thoughts on how that disappointment that Gwen has, that she feels in that marriage, contributes to how feminism is working in her life?
I have thoughts.
Go ahead. Well,
I also got the impression that her character thought that she was missing something, and maybe the time had come and gone, for her to have that window where, it's like the notion of Camelot. Oh, I'm never going to have this again. Oh, those were the days, and if only I had, if only I had gone to law school, if only I had done this, only I had done that. And then when you take yourself out of the situation that you're in and you try to go back into another one, maybe that wasn't going to work for her. But yet they tried it, which is pretty bizarre, actually. Anybody in here know anybody who'd be willing to do that? Just asking. So.
Yeah,
Sorry.
My question sort of goes along with that. One of the things as a feminist of the 70s, the disillusionment of where the movement went. Where I thought we would be now is not where we are. And trying to deal with younger generation, my own daughter, wait a minute, we did all this for you, and you're not, but my place to find how I get to understanding her place in it all. But and you were talking about that shared thing, and I think we all thought that's where it would be. So where's it gonna go? Maybe it'd be for someone younger, since you have a good knowledge of where it's coming from, where's it going to go?
I think that's hard, because I think that the modern feminist philosophers from my generation are Beyonce and Emma Watson. It's hard because there's this illusion that we've arrived at equality that I think a lot of people ascribe to already. I mentioned today, in fact, about this panel, and somebody asked me if I was one of the crazy feminists. And to them, that meant that, do I hate men and want them all to die? And so I think it's really hard to see where it's headed when people don't know where we are. Because I don't think we live in a society of equality, but I think there's the illusion of it because I'm sitting here and I'm wearing pants. And because I voted on the 4th, there's this illusion that I have it all. I think a lot of people are still wrapped up in that. And so going back to the earlier question, I think feminism is about choice and being able to choose what you want to do with your life outside the constraints of society. And what I think is interesting is that both those women made choices, but now they can't change them. They're both stuck with the choices that they made. There's not fluidity within there. So that's just a thought and no conclusive statement. Yeah, like that?
I have a question. Specifically for Sahara, my favorite character in this play is Avery. Just the stuff that comes out of her mouth, and she gets all the applause, and it's just so great. I also love the scene where Avery and Alice are both saying, no, you shouldn't have done that. It's like someone who was born in the 1930s and someone who was born in the 1980s, or looking at the poor woman who was born in the 1960s going, oh, honey, you have no idea what's going on. So my question to you, Sahara, is you're familiar with Lacey Green? Or no?
No.
Oh, okay, but I can't ask you what you think Lacey Green might think of this. She's a blogger, and she's on Facebook, and
I've seen her once.
Yeah, anyway. So what's your take on Avery and the stuff that she's expressing?
Oh gosh, I think she's really interesting. She's all over the place. She hates Schlafly, and then she's trying to employ Schlafly to win back her boyfriend, and then it doesn't work. I like her, because I think she's trying to move forward. And I don't think she has a clear direction of that, and that's the thing. I don't think a lot of people my age have a clear direction of what forward even means, because again, they don't know where they are. But I enjoy her because I think, while I don't always agree with her opinions, I like that she has them.
I think Avery knows she doesn't want to be Gwen, and she doesn't want to be Catherine, and she's critical of them, but not in an angry sense, but just in sort of a practical sense. But she is the character where I find myself wondering, where will she find the kind of happiness that Gwen can't find and that Catherine can't find?
In the 70s, feminism meant Gloria Steinem and Bella Asberg. It was so tied to certain personalities that were there. And then when they kind of trailed away, maybe there was a little bit of confusion. I mean, there's a myth that goes on and on about how women burn their bras at the Miss America pageant. That didn't happen. I mean, they threw them in a trash can and maybe somebody put a match in there, but hey.
They couldn't get a license because it was a wooden.
They couldn't get it. That's right.
License.
That's exactly right. She knows. But, sometimes I worry about, younger generation kids, 19, 20 women, being confused. I mean, we live in a country where you can give an Uzi to a 9-year-old, but you can't make pot brownies for an adult. So there's no confusion at all over feminism, right? So it's a word that means equality, and that's pretty much what it's boiled down to, I think, for today, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I've given a lot of thought, and I write about that in my director's notes, but as a teacher, I would be horrified when my students would say, well, I'm not a feminist, but, and I think, well, is that, growing up, my mother said, well, I think feminism is a very useful word because it describes the kind of equality of opportunity that I did not have, that I want you to have. But I don't think my 16-year-old daughter really has strong feelings about it. She just has the sense of well, I can do anything, can't I? I do think one of the issues that is difficult about talking about where we're going to go from here on in is just that the lack of equality is a bit more difficult to put your finger on. Some of it is institutional, absolutely. Some of it is much more subtle. I still fairly recently was in a situation where I was selling a house with my husband, and the man to whom, and it could just as easily have been a woman, but the man to whom we were selling the house did not make eye contact with me once throughout the whole interchange, even though my husband and I were both speaking about it. He just didn't look at me once. I went to buy a car with my husband, and the car's husband didn't look at me once, making the assumption that I was not going to be the primary decider about these sorts of things. So maybe it's those sorts of subtle things. I want to pop in a little bit about men here, because my father, I would say, would describe himself as a feminist. That wasn't a word that he really used when I was growing up. But I do see, and being the parent of a young man, boy, so many guys have such a hard time with this. If we have expectations of women being in certain roles, boy, we have these expectations of men. In New Zealand now, you're still really suspect if you're a guy and you can't fix your own car. If you don't want to fix your own car, or you can't fix your own car, or you are very overtly emotional in public situations, or you even even doing basic electrical repairs or plumbing, you're really suspect if you can't do. There's incredible pigeonholing that goes on for men too. I think we can expand the discussion very easily to be about equality of the sexes and equality of people of different sexual orientation, but also just about acceptance of a whole range of gender roles, or roles that are not dependent on gender. I think that's a huge issue too.
Mm-hmm. Kristjane, you and I had a really interesting conversation out in the hallway while we were waiting for the production to end today about what the amount of time you have to spend in class to sort of demystify feminism and make feminism accessible. And how do you do that, and how can and Sahara, you can jump in here too, since you guys have been in the academic world of this. How can you make feminism more accessible, not just to women but to men, to get young college men to take those classes and start understanding where feminism theory is coming from and apply it to the way that they think?
Wow, those are really good questions. When we were talking in the hallway, I was pointing out, so I teach a range of classes on both gender and sexuality, and I get more pushback around gender today than looking at sexuality or sexual orientation in particular. And I think that, for instance, like students are much more resistant to feminist theory than queer theory. And I think that represents maybe gains that are made in the gay rights movement, which is really, really great. But I'm always surprised at the extent of, well, my students are self-selected, so most of them want to, take a gender class, but come in with preconceptions about gender in a way that they don't about sexuality, because maybe we don't talk about it as much. But I have to spend like a third of every class just talking about what is feminism, looking at patriarchy, looking at the stereotypes around feminists, that they're angry, man-hating lesbians, right? These are the typical ones I see. And doing a lot of that work, like examining the stereotypes and also preparing students to engage in these conversations, because they're going to go home for Thanksgiving right now. And I'm sure they're going to want to have conversations, and they're going to have one of those things thrown out of them, right? And they have to kind of expect, or kind of know how to talk about some of these things, because they're distractions, really. All of those are ways to silence a conversation, silence conversations about gender equality, and you have to be kind of prepared to deal with those. So we do a lot of that early on, and we also talk a lot about patriarchy in general, because as most of the other panelists we're talking about, right? Patriarchy also harms men in really specific ways. We talk about they act like a man box, right? Yeah. They're supposed to like make a lot of money and always be in charge. Don't cry. And so yeah, it's just a process. There's so much, and I love that. I mean, I love the way that some social media engages in this. I use that for my students during their 20s. Feministing, Jezebel, confused cats against feminism. All of these are ways to be like, what is going on? What is going on here? What is going on? And I think that helps, right? Have those conversations, because if it's just reading, which I love, the original theorists, and not, connecting it to people of their generation, like you were saying, Emma Watson, and the critique of Emma Watson, and those type of things. So I guess there's not a short answer for that. But it's interesting that there's a lot more, I'll get more negative reviews for my gender classes than my other ones, and it's what I'm most interested in. And I talk to other people that teach gender studies, and I think that that's because, those conversations are more tension-filled in a way that sexuality isn't, which is really strange, but that's my experience.
Yeah, I found, and we were talking about this earlier, that people are automatically on the defensive when you bring up things about gender roles. Like if I mention that I'm a feminist, it automatically, it puts people on edge. I feel like you have to approach the discussion like a skittish cat. You have to come over and gently reach out your hand and sniff and say, it's okay. But I think it's really interesting that people are automatically willing. They're not as open to that conversation. They're automatically willing to fight, no matter what side of the scale they're on. And I am too. I admit to that, but it makes it really hard to have an open dialogue about things.
When I moved to Utah and I labeled myself as a feminist in a class, a student said to me, "But how can you be a feminist? You're married." We have very different notions of what feminism means.
The first time I saw the big